The early 2000s were the era of horror remakes. Studios were digging deep into the vault, resurrecting classic franchises for a new generation, and the results were, honestly, all over the place. Some remakes were praised as bold, modern reinventions. Films like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Dawn of the Dead, and The Hills Have Eyes didn't just remake the originals, they reintroduced horror icons with a darker, more intense edge, and in some cases were even considered superior to what came before. Others quietly slipped through the cracks, eventually gaining cult appreciation as underrated gems. Movies like The House of Wax or The Amityville Horror, films that audiences have slowly come around to over time. Then came the completely unnecessary remakes like Black Christmas, The Omen, The Hitcher, and of course, Prom Night. We even got the short-lived 3D gimmick era with My Bloody Valentine 3D, which honestly isn't nearly as bad as people say. And of course, we can't forget Rob Zombie's Halloween, a remake so divisive that horror fans are still arguing about it today. But out of all the horror remakes released during the 2000s, there's one film that stands above the rest when it comes to controversy, a movie that, in my opinion, has been completely misunderstood and unfairly hated for years. Welcome back to Mike's Movie Room, and today we're diving into the question, why is Friday the 13th, 2009 so hated? And does it deserve it? Our story starts in 2003 when the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake hit theaters and completely changed the horror landscape. Critics weren't exactly kind to it. They criticized the excessive gore and said it lacked the slow, suspenseful nuance of the original. The film still sits at just 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. But audiences had a very different reaction. Viewers embraced it as a darker, more aggressive reimagining, a fresh take that introduced the story to a new generation with updated and new characters and a modern intensity. And financially, it was a monster hit. Made for just under $10 million, the film went on to gross over $107 million worldwide, proving that horror remakes weren't just viable, they were extremely profitable. Over time, the movie earned its place as a modern horror classic, and many fans now consider it to be one of the best horror remakes ever made. It even spawned a prequel that received mixed reactions. Not quite as strong as the remake itself, but still a fun watch, and honestly, the unrated version is worth checking out for the practical effects alone. Seeing this success, Platinum Dunes, the production company founded by Michael Bay, realized they had struck gold. And almost immediately, they began acquiring the rights to some of horror's most iconic franchises, planning to reboot them for a new era. Their next project arrived in 2005 with the Amityville Horror, starring Ryan Reynolds, Melissa George, and a pre-kick-ass Joel Grace Moretz. And once again, the formula worked. The film grossed over $107 million worldwide on a $19 million budget, becoming Platinum Dunes' second major hit. Critics still were not impressed. The film holds 24% score on Rotten Tomatoes, and audience reactions were mixed. But personally, I've always thought this remake was underrated. In fact, I actually prefer it to the original. The industry soon took notice. Suddenly, horror remakes were everywhere. Films like Dawn of the Dead, House of Wax, and The Hills Have Eyes proved that revisiting classic horror properties could actually produce genuinely strong modern films. But then, things started to change. The quality of remakes began to slip. In 2006, both The Omen and Black Christmas were released, and fans quickly dismissed them as unnecessary retreads, especially The Omen, which felt almost like a shot-for-shot remake that barely added anything new and was reminiscent of Gus Van Sant's shot-for-shot remake of Psycho. Then came The Hitcher in 2007, another Platinum Dunes production. This time, the formula finally faltered. The film earned about $25 million worldwide on a $10 million budget and landed at 19% on Rotten Tomatoes, with both critics and audiences agreeing it felt like a remake that simply didn't justify its existence. And things only got worse from there. In 2008, the Prom Night remake arrived with the dreaded PG-13 rating and quickly became one of the most criticized horror remakes of the era. Even though it made $57 million on a $20 million budget, the film was widely panned, sitting at just 9% on Rotten Tomatoes and labeled as a predictable, generic slasher that lacked the suspense and creativity of the original. By this point, audiences were starting to grow tired of remakes altogether. And that's the environment the Friday the 13th reboot walked into in 2009. Friday the 13th was released in theaters on February 13th, 2009. The film opened at number 1 at the box office, bringing in over $40 million during its opening weekend, setting a thin record for the biggest opening weekend ever for a horror remake. But what happened next tells a very different story. In its second weekend, the film suffered a massive 80% drop, eventually finishing at about $65 million domestically and just over $91 million worldwide. Critics were harsh, leaving it at a 26% score on Rotten Tomatoes, and fans were divided. So why did the movie fall off so quickly? And why were reactions so negative? The film was directed by Marcus Nispel, the same director behind the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and it carries a very similar tone and visual style. It's gritty, aggressive, and packed with brutal kills and great carnage candy. On paper, it sounds like a recipe for success. So what went wrong? Some fans argued the filmmakers didn't understand the source material. But honestly, I think they understood it perfectly. Just like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this remake modernized the franchise while still respecting its roots. And if this movie was released today, I don't think it would receive half the hate it got back then. Because this film is absolutely packed with nods and Easter eggs to the original movies. People complained about the new Camp Crystal Lake sign for some reason, but the original sign is actually still there, hidden in the corner of a quick blink and you miss it shot. The movie still takes place in New Jersey, just like the originals, and even the target bags all throughout the camp match the designs from Part 1. Inside Jason's tunnels, you can spot Mark's wheelchair from Part 2, along with a sweater resembling Pamela Voorhees' sweater. I mean, we even get an updated version of Jason's shrine from Part 2. Oh my God! Jason discovering his hockey mask in the barn, and even the barn itself, is an obvious homage to Part 3. And Clay, played by Jared Padalecki, is clearly inspired by Rob from Part 4, the brother who's searching for Jason for revenge after losing his sister. This movie isn't disrespecting the franchise, it's built on love for it. One criticism I hear constantly is about the characters. People say they're boring or lack substance. And honestly, I don't really understand that complaint. Characters have never been the main attraction in Friday the 13th. People come to these movies to watch Jason do his thing, and if the characters are entertaining along the way, that's a bonus. Outside of a few standouts like Part 4 and Part 6, and I'll throw 7 and Jason X in the honorable mention category, most entries in this franchise don't rely on deeply developed characters. So for a Friday the 13th movie, this remake actually delivers a pretty entertaining cast. The opening group, a bunch of slightly douchey friends searching the woods for weed, are dispatched in what is one of the greatest horror openings since Scream in my opinion. Then we meet the second group, spring breakers staying at a lakeside cabin owned by the parents of one of the most intentionally unbearable characters in the entire franchise, Trent. And when Jason finally gets to him, it's incredibly satisfying. And at the center of all of it is Clay, searching for his missing sister Whitney, giving this film a stronger narrative drive than many previous entries. Then there's Jason himself, this time portrayed by Derek Mears, and he's fantastic. He's massive, intimidating, and the updated design ranks amongst the best looks Jason has ever had. This version is genuinely terrifying. But this is where a lot of fan complaints begin. The biggest one? Jason runs. And I hate to break it to people, but Jason ran in the early films. In parts 2 through 4, Jason was fast, aggressive, and human. It wasn't until part 6, after Tommy Jarvis resurrected him, that Jason became the slow, zombie-like figure most people remember. This remake combines the first 4 films into one story, so of course he's going to run. And to be completely honest, Jason sprinting towards you with an axe is far more terrifying than a slow walk. Another complaint is that Jason behaves like a hunter, setting traps and living in a lair. But again, that comes directly from Part 2. Jason was portrayed as a backwoods hillbilly living in a little shack that he made, or lair, whatever you want to call it, before the supernatural elements took over later in the series, and he was also setting traps to catch his victims. The underground tunnels also make perfect sense. They keep the character grounded and human, while explaining how Jason can still appear everywhere so quickly. And then there's the criticism that Jason keeps Whitney alive because she resembles his mother. But this idea also comes straight from the originals. In Part 2, Jenny survives by putting on Pamela Voorhees' sweater and psychologically confusing Jason into seeing her as his mother. The remake simply expands on that concept. Finally, let's talk about the kills. The film features 13 on-screen kills, 15 if you include Mrs. Voorhees and Jason himself, making it one of the highest body counts in the franchise, behind only Jason X and Jason Goes to Hell. And unlike most of the Friday the 13th films, it wasn't heavily cut down by the MPAA, allowing for creative, brutal, and memorable kill sequences that fully embrace the franchise's identity. At the end of the day, I truly believe the Friday the 13th reboot suffered from one thing more than anything else: timing. It arrived right as audiences were growing tired of the remake boom, and people were ready to reject the trend altogether. Instead of judging the movie on its own merits, many viewers had already decided they were done with remakes. And because of that, this film becomes an easy target. But looking back now, it feels less like a failure and more like an underappreciated entry that could have launched an entirely new era for the franchise, especially with Derek Mears driving such a strong version of Jason. It didn't try to reinvent Jason, it didn't try to turn Friday the 13th into something it wasn't. Instead, it pulled together the DNA of the first 4 films and reshaped it for a modern audience, faster, meaner, and more brutal than ever before. And maybe the real reason the movie was rejected back then is because audiences weren't ready to go back to a classic slasher horror film just yet. But now, years later, as fans rediscover practical effects, grounded killers, and old-school slashers, the Friday the 13th remake feels less like a misstep and more like a franchise reset that never got the sequel it deserved. Alrighty guys, so that's the end of this breakdown on why the Friday the 13th 2009 reboot is so hated and does it deserve it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely drop a comment down below and let me know your thoughts and opinions on this film. Let me know if you agree with my thoughts or if you guys disagree. Definitely love to talk to you guys about this movie. And like always, if you guys like content like this and want to see more, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Until next time, I'm Mike's Movie Room. I'm out of here. Peace.